Understanding 529 plans and their state tax benefits.
You have kids, they grow up, and before you know it, it's time to plan for college.
Where do you start?
How much is it going to cost?
Will you qualify for financial aid?
Should you be looking into scholarships?
When will you be able to retire?
What about student loans?
The list of questions is never ending. The good news is, all the answers are right here. Welcome to the Taming the High Cost of College podcast. Here is your host, certified financial planner, Brad Baldridge.
Hello and welcome to Taming the High Cost of College. I'm your host, Brad Baldridge. Today we have another interview with John Munley, where we're going to talk even more about 529 plans. Now in this episode, we're going to talk a little bit about 529 plans and how they fit into the overall plan. We're going to talk about tax benefits, which we haven't talked as much about. We're also going to talk about some of the other options that you might consider in addition to 529 plans or instead of 529 plans. So for many families, 529 plans are an important piece of the puzzle, but we also use other types of accounts in addition to the 529 plans. And in some rare instances, 529 plans aren't the best option, and we choose to go a different way. So John and I will talk a little bit about all those different ideas and help you understand what some of the options are and perhaps guide you in a slightly different direction than you might have gone otherwise. So stay tuned and learn even more about 529s. All right, John, we're back talking 529s again. How have you been?
Been great. Thank you, Brad. How about yourself?
So far, so good. Just graduated my second son, so he'll be off to college in the fall. So we're moving right along, I guess.
And ready to break open that 529 plan. Tap into it, I guess, huh?
That's
perfect timing for this discussion. And congratulations.
Yes, thank you. All right, so we're going to talk about 529 strategies. We've talked about some of the basics, and now we're going to kind of dive deeper into strategies that families can use to really leverage a 529 if they want to, and talk about maybe some alternatives as well. So I think I mentioned it in one of the other podcasts, but I want to beat the drum on this one a little bit. So there's this rumor out there where people say something to the effect of, well, you have a teenager or you have a kid in high school or whatever it might be, and now it's too late to use a 529. Have you heard people say something like that in the past?
I definitely have. Basically, their premise is, well, I didn't open it when they were a young child, so it's too late now, and there's really no point in doing it now. We can just save it in a checking account or a savings account and have that money there when we need it, which there's definitely some fallacies around that.
Absolutely right. So I don't agree that it's too late ever to participate in a 529. I think maybe there's diminished returns where you might get a lot more benefit if you started when your kids were, newborns or grade school or whatever it might be. But I think we use them all the time, and lots of the people I'm working with have high school juniors and seniors. And even then it makes sense to start using a 529, even if you haven't so far. There are rare exceptions where maybe it doesn't make sense, but let's talk about, why 529s make sense. And I would say number one is taxes, right? There's lots of potential tax benefits for 529s.
Exactly. So depending on the state that you live in, there are certain amounts of states that they'll give tax breaks for contributions that you make to 529 plans. They have different rules. For instance, where I am in New Jersey, if you make under $200,000 AGI, you can contribute as a couple up to $20,000 a year into that New Jersey 529 and get a tax break. Now, our tax rate in New Jersey here is 6.7%. So you're basically saving yourself $1,300 in taxes by contributing that money to a 529. I work with also people who live in New York City, and not only do they have the New York state tax, but they have the New York City tax. That's almost 11%. In New York, you can contribute whatever you want, but your tax deduction is up to a maximum of $10,000. Again, if you live in Manhattan or Brooklyn, Queens, anywhere in New York City, you're getting an 11% return on that money. You're getting $1,100 back off of your New York state taxes, which that alone is a really great reason to invest in a 529.
Right, absolutely. And here in Wisconsin, the two you mentioned, there was a limit. It sounded like maybe per tax return up to that $10,000. Here in Wisconsin, the limit is $3,580, which that number changes every year because it's based on inflation. So it started at $3,000 and it's gone up for the last, 7, 8, 9 years, or whatever it's been that they've had it in place, based on inflation. So it keeps clicking up, but that's per beneficiary. So it essentially, in round numbers, $3,500 per beneficiary. So if you have 4 kids, you could do it 4 times. And then sometimes in Wisconsin, we'll actually set up plans for mom and dad as well. So now we can do it 6 times. So if you're saving aggressively for college, which again, a lot of times we are, especially in the late stage where we're saying, oh, we need to be putting in $4,000 every quarter or $2,000 a month or something like that, where we really are saving aggressively. Sometimes we will hit those limits, sometimes not, but it just makes sense to understand how they work, because that's a state tax benefit on top of the federal benefits, which again, if reviewing from the last couple, which would be that they could gross tax deferred. And if you spend it on qualified college expenses, then you don't have to pay taxes on the growth either. So it's 100% tax free. And we talked about all the details. So you can go back to the previous episodes if you need to brush up on the very basics of how they work. But generally, qualified expenses are college, tuition, room and board, books and fees are typical. All right.
And as a general rule of thumb, whenever you can save money on taxes, that's always a good thing.
Right, exactly. And the reality of it is, from when we start doing college planning, a lot of families are going to need to set up some sort of segregated college account anyway. Because if you just say, well, there's $25,000 in our savings account and we're going to start putting $2,000 a month into the savings account, then anytime an emergency comes along, like, oh, we need a nice vacation, then you tap the savings account and you don't really pay attention to how much of that was set aside for college, and you inadvertently start spending your college money. Whereas what I found is, as soon as you segregate it into a 529 and label it college, it's much more sticky. You're not going to tap into that unless there's truly an emergency. And again, you have access to it, as we talked about in the past. You may have to pay some taxes and penalties, but it is your money. So in a dire emergency, I need to get this operation and I got to pay for it now. Well, then you could tap your 529 if you needed to. But the wayward vacation usually then doesn't mess up your college savings.
And it eliminates the temptation to go into a taxable account and say, well, it is really for college, but we'll take it out now. We'll put it back in a few months. And this way, through 529, you really don't want to do that, again, for tax reasons.
Right. Absolutely. All right. So that's kind of the benefits of the 529. Let's review the downside again. When people say it's too late to use a 529, again, I would argue that, well, if you can save $10, it's probably worth doing a 529, especially if you're setting up an account already, right? You're going to have to open a new account. Why not a 529? But occasionally we'll run into someone that already has college savings set up, maybe inside their own retirement because they're older and they think, well, I'm going to tap my retirement for college. Or maybe they just want to put it in a bank where they know it's quote unquote safe. And those make sense sometimes. But again, the tax benefits are there. But the downside, I think, of the 529 is if you're not paying any taxes at all, both federal and state, then maybe you don't need a 529 and you could use, other similar investments, whether it's mutual funds or bank accounts or whatever it might be. Now,
exactly. And again, that you hit on that taxes. So if you pay no taxes, federal or you don't get the state benefit for doing a 529, then it's probably not worth it. But again, in most other cases, it is.
Right. But then you're still going to maybe need to set up that separate college savings account, again, to keep it safe and not mix it with your other money and inadvertently spend it. But then the other point I think that people run into is obeying the rules of the 529 adds a little layer of complexity, right? We keep saying, well, if you spend it properly, you get all these tax benefits. If you don't spend it properly, you get some tax penalties. So I guess there's some people out there that say, well, it isn't worth the benefits because I'm afraid I'm going to get the penalties instead. So that's, I think, is legitimate. And then finally, just the overall hassle factor of, I've already got some sort of brokerage account or investment account or whatever it is that's all set up and ready to go. And all I have to do is turn it on and put an extra $1,000 a month into it. That's easy. If I have to figure out which 529 and do all the paperwork and figure it all out, that's a lot more effort. I don't want to do that effort, which I guess is fine if you don't mind, again, foregoing whatever benefits there might have been from the 529. So let's talk a little bit about those benefits. I did some kind of back of the napkin math on a bunch of 529s, and what's come up is there's about 30 states where you can save $100 a year or more by using your 529. And a lot of that might be, again, going to the maximum limit, right? You mentioned, here in Wisconsin, it was $2,580. So if you did that for 4 people, now we're getting, it's about $189 per account times 4 accounts, so we're getting to some serious money. If you do the full 10,000 in your state, what was the number again? About
in New Jersey, it's if you 6.7% tax rate here. So basically, for $10,000, you're going to get $670 back,
right,
by contributing that.
And you can go up to 10 or 20.
20,000.
But you can go up to 20, right?
So you're looking at 1,300.
Right. Exactly. So especially for families where you're aggressively saving, in some of the states, that high cash flow is going to equate to, again, pretty substantial amounts of money. And again, so based on 30 saving more than 100 and 20 saving more than 500, that means there's 9 or 10 that are in between there where you're, it'll save you $100 or $200 or $300 a year. But if you look back and say, well, if my student had to work for that and they could make $15 an hour in order to get $300, they'd have to work 20 hours. So if it's not worth mom and dad's time, maybe it's worth the student's time to figure it out. Because if they could save $300 and then you gave it to them, that's probably a pretty good pay, because I don't think it's going to take that many hours for them to figure it out, especially for a brighter kid that understands this stuff a little bit. And again, mom and dad may have to help in either way because it's a little bit new to most students. But again, the 529 is not the only game in town. So let's talk a little bit more about what else is out there. What else could we put our money in? We've already mentioned just the straight taxable account, where instead of putting your money in a 529, you could go put it in a bank account or a mutual fund or whatever, and get essentially the same investment options as you have inside the 529. So if cash is paying 1 or 2%, cash type accounts, or bank accounts, savings accounts are paying 1 or 2%, you can probably do that inside the 529 or outside the 529. So you're going to get the same rate of return. You just get the different tax treatment and the different rules. So you could, like I said, take it to the bank and just get your 1%. But then there's other types of accounts where we do get tax benefits as well. So there's another college savings account out there. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. It's called a Coverdell savings account, and you don't see them used much anymore because they were very popular before 529s became established, and the rules are very similar, except with the Coverdell, the maximum annual contribution is $2,000 a year, which, per beneficiary. So even if you were going to max that out every year for 18 years, the most you can put in a Coverdell account is $36,000. It just makes sense in today's day with the 529 plans, because your maximum amount is so much higher and the benefits are the same, that it just makes more sense to go to a 529 plan. I know I was talking to you, Brad, beforehand, and I've never come across anybody who's had a Coverdell, and you said you've come across it a couple times.
Yes, there's been a handful. I've talked with like a grandparent that had started it many, many years ago. Might have been prior to 529 or about the same time as 529. Yeah, and the other challenge, of course, is in order to get the deductions, there's income rules where if you earn too much, you can't get the savings, that you can't make the contributions, I guess, there. So it's not the deductibility, right. It's the contribution. I'm sorry. So that's another challenge, is you can't actually even contribute if your income is too high.
Right. I think it's $110,000 for single and $220,000 for joint.
Right.
tax filers.
Yeah. So that's one. And then we've got something else out there that used to be very popular, but is waning now as well. But I do run across these as well, which is a UTMA or a UGMA type of account.
And I come across them actually quite frequently. And I think just because when parents start to save, everyone's a lot of people have heard of custodial account. They're like, oh, it's in my child's name. I'll put it in their name. The problem with that is just for financial aid purposes. And this is a topic for another podcast, but quickly, if it's just UTMA is a student assets count 20% towards the expected family contribution formula. Parent assets count about 5%. 529 is a parent asset. The UTMA is a child's asset. So that's going to have much more impact on a family's ability to get need-based financial aid. So, and the other thing with the UTMA is a 529, the parent owns it, the child's a beneficiary. UTMA, depending on the state of majority that you live in, once that child turns 18 or 21, that account gets turned over to them legally. It's their money.
Right.
So if it's 18 and they don't want to use it for college, it's technically their money and they can do whatever they want with it.
Right. And then technically it's their money no matter how old they are. So you can't spend it. You can't take your student's UTMA and go to Vegas with it. Now, your student could maybe go to Vegas with it because it's for the beneficiary's benefit, which is, again, usually the child. Now, because a 2-year-old can't manage their own investments, there's another person involved in the UTMA, which is often the parent, and they're the custodial parent, and their job is to manage the money for the benefit of that student. So if you think your kid going off to Vegas is a good thing for them, you can spend their money on that trip. And of course, you could say if college is good for them, you can spend that money for college. What you probably can't do is say, I'm going to take the money to Vegas and I'm going to have a good time with it. Because technically, if they found a good lawyer and sued you for their money, and you say, well, I spent it in Vegas, they could recover it, so to speak. And now, in reality, most UTMAs are small dollar amounts and most kids have no idea what's going on. So they don't get the lawyer. It very seldom happens. You see that in the high profile, child actor cases and that kind of stuff. But the typical grandma gave me $10,000 of stock and here it sits, there's not a lot of police watching what's going on there.
And the one other disadvantage with that is, let's say you put $20,000 into a UTMA when your child's born, it's now worth $50,000. You're going to use that for college. When you sell that out, that $30,000 capital gains, that's $30,000 in gains you have to pay taxes on it. Again, unlike a 529 where you don't have to pay taxes if it's used for qualified education, UTMAs, you still have to pay taxes on those gains.
Right. So the UTMA used to be a good thing because 529s didn't exist. And at least when you paid taxes, you paid it at the child's rate. Well, with the kiddie tax now, a lot of times the children are at the same rate as mom and dad, and there's taxes to begin with. And of course, it's also tied up now. It belongs to that child. You can't change it from one child to the next either. So there's just lots of reasons why UTMAs are kind of the old way of doing it. And I would never start them. And as we're doing college planning, we're often spending time trying to figure out how to unwind them. So because this money needs to be spent for the benefit of the child, we might spend that money on their lessons or their sports or on their private high school or whatever it is, and then take the money that we would have spent on those things and put it into the 529. But that way the UTMA goes away before college happens, again, because of the financial aid reasons. So in a nutshell, UTMAs are probably not worth it. There'd be that rare case. Where we often go, or where I often go, is the other two now. The other main thing would be the Roth IRA. Now, a Roth IRA is generally for retirement, but sometimes we will do a 529 for most of the money or a lot of the money, and also put some money in a Roth IRA or an IRA or a retirement plan or something like that. Again, because there's that challenge of you can have too much money in a 529. As we talked about, you need qualified expenses to take it out. So if you have 2 kids and they're going to go to the local state school, an example might be $25,000 per year of qualified expenses. So you have $100,000 of expenses times 2 kids. If you already have $175,000 in 529 accounts and you're saying, well, let's save a little bit more. We may need it, we may not need it, depending on what happens with the growth and if they win any scholarships or if the price of the college goes up or if the price of the college goes down. Don't count on that one, by the way. But, there's some variability. So often what we might do is say, okay, well, we've got a little more saving to do, but we're not sure we're going to spend it on college because we don't know the final prices. Our youngest isn't even in high school yet, so it's hard to know. We might split up the savings and say, well, if we need to save $1,000 a month, we'll put $600 a month into 529s and $400 a month into a Roth IRA because we have access to all of our contributions into the Roth IRA anytime, any reason. So college would be that reason. Now, the challenge is we don't get the growth and we don't get the tax deductions, the state tax benefits and a lot of those other things. And that's why we might pair them up. In your state, you mentioned you can put in $20,000 per year and get a deduction. If you happen to be saving $25,000 a year for college, that, the obvious decision there might be, well, the first 20 goes into the 529 and then another 5 goes into the Roth IRA, where we have some flexibility. Because a great situation is we don't need it for college. Turns out they won some scholarships or we did good planning in other ways and now we don't need it. So we're just going to now relabel it as retirement. And that's a great place to have retirement money as well.
Now, and I've come up with exactly what you said. So the Roth is great because you can take the contributions out and use them for basically anything. So if you do have that gap and you don't want to borrow money and you do have enough saved for retirement, a Roth is a great place to go and use those contributions. In other cases with clients, we've also looked at their traditional IRAs. So if you're under 59 and a half and you take money out of your IRA, there's usually a 10% penalty. If you use it for qualified expenses, which college is, that 10% penalty gets waived. You still have to pay income tax on that, but you don't have to pay the penalty. What I've had a few clients do is once they hit towards retirement age 65, we know they're going to have a big pension. We know they're going to have Social Security, and they do have a big IRA established that if there's a little bit of shortfall for college, rather than borrowing it, we can kind of project out how they're going to be living in retirement. And if they have excess in that IRA, we're able to utilize that to pay for college and prevent them from borrowing some money. It doesn't happen for most people. I would not recommend that going into retirement, but people who are going to have a large income, again, with pensions and Social Security, and they have a big IRA as it is, it's one way to maybe bridge that gap between what college is going to cost and what they have saved already in dedicated 529 account.
Right. And I've seen other situations like I had someone that had relatively high income and they were in high tax brackets and they were older parents. So they actually were going to be 60 during most of the college career. So they were going to have access to the retirement plan if they wanted. And they thought they might even be retired by the time college happened. So for them, and this is a rare instance, but for them, college really was a retirement expense because they would be retired. And they had access to not a 401k plan at work and a 403b plan at a different job, and they were maxing them both. So they were saving somewhere in the neighborhood of $52,000 a year, and they assumed some of that was going to be used with college. And the math worked, right? They're not really robbing their retirement to pay for college. They're just choosing to use a retirement plan as the vehicle in their situation because they were the right age. And everything was kind of in their favor in that situation.
And this is where planning really comes into play in terms of paying for college, because you're not only looking at, all right, where am I now in terms of my income, my assets, and what I project my retirement to be, but also here's this college bill. What's the best way for my family to approach this and pay for this? And I think every situation is unique and presents its own opportunities and challenges.
Right. Yeah. Again, another example that I've seen is around tax planning, where we decided to put some of the college money into the 401k so that we could bring down the income by bringing down the income, we qualified for tax credits, the college tax credit. And that tax credit was more valuable by far than the little bit they were going to get from their 529 benefits in that situation. Now, some states are more generous than others. We've talked about that. Again, some states you're only going to get a couple $100. Other states might be 1,000 or 2,000. So that's where understanding all the options and how it all fits together, and again, full disclosure, right? You really need to understand all the rules and all the tax rules and understand the investment opportunities, whether the money's going to go up and down and all that type of stuff. And we'll, of course, put all the actual disclosures at the end here. But it's, again, this was not advice. It can get very complicated in some situations. Sometimes it's quite simple. 529 is the easy winner, but not always. And that's where you need to understand and do that comparison for your own situation. So how do you generally recommend for families that have very young kids, right? If you're talking with a young couple, let's say they've got a 4-year-old and a new baby on the way, and they're saying, we want to save for college. What comes up usually there as far as when you're working with families?
Well, the big thing is first to see, are they in a position that they can even afford to start saving for college? So we'll kind of look at what's their discretionary spending? What's their non-discretionary spending? Are they funding their retirement? So are you getting the full benefit from your company by putting money towards a 401k so you're getting the match? If they're getting all those things, then we say, all right, here's your excess cash. How much of this excess cash that you have a year do we want to start contributing to college? Especially now, if you have somebody who has a newborn and a 4-year-old, they're probably looking at $700,000 in college costs. Again, not taking financial aid or scholarships into consideration. If you're paying full sticker price, you're looking at a price like that. That $700,000 isn't going to magically appear if you're putting in $2,000 a year for the savings. So we have a discussion. Do you want to help your kids pay for college? How much do you want to help them? Do you want to help them pay all of it? And then we kind of get them on a plan and say, all right, this is a monthly amount that you're able to afford to do, not affect the money that you're saving towards retirement. And we make smart investments again through the 529. If the kids are younger, we'll go with the aggressive approach and put most of it in equities. And hopefully over time, this account will start building up.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so I would do something similar. I guess one of the challenges that many families have is to understand that, if you started at $200 a month, let's say, and you did that for 18 years, to get to a similar amount, if you only have 5 or 6 years to get to that same amount, it could be more like $1,200 a month to get there. Again, because you lose all that opportunity for the growth. Now, sometimes that's just the way it has to be, though. A lot of families are saying, but we don't have $200 a month because we're paying $2,000 a month towards childcare or something like that. So as long as you shift your priorities, and, as the money becomes available, you can kind of agree to, well, we'll save higher dollar amounts later. That can work, but you have to have the discipline to actually do it and not use that as an excuse to not save now.
And again, it's hard. You were just talking, Brad, it's yours, so your son's graduating high school. I'm sure, started thinking about his college education when he was born. I have 4 daughters, 2 graduated college, one's in college now, and I have another one who's just going to be a 9th grader. So I have a lot of tuitions that I have paid and have to pay. And yeah, I mean, if you want to help your kids pay for this, you've got to start early and to really make a conscious effort to make these contributions year in and year out, because it's not magically just going to balloon to a big number. You've got to make it a habit to, all right, this is how much I'm setting aside each month. And then you let the magic of compounding work, and hopefully it grows so that you're at least can, help them pay for part of it.
Right. Absolutely. I guess that's the other side of it is I've heard a number of people say things, well, maybe you divide it into thirds. We're going to borrow a third, mom and dad will pay a third, and the student will pay a third, or different, or they're responsible to get scholarships for a third. So there's a number of different ways, but I think part of it is to understand what you're up against and plan accordingly. And then, of course, if you have older students, both John and I spend a lot of time really running those kind of numbers and figuring out, what is it going to cost to go to the state school? What about that public or private school but they're giving you a nice scholarship? How does that compare? And maybe we want to find another school that will give us a similar scholarship. So just understanding the options and piecing it all together. All right. Any final thoughts as far as 529s? Because I think we're going to, get together one more time and talk about some very advanced strategies and kind of go from there.
No, and I think this was great in terms of, in almost every situation, it makes sense to put some money into a 529, whether it's tax advantages or having a dedicated account just for college. Just the flexibility that you're able to have to change beneficiaries, use it for grad school, that I think every college saving strategy should at least have 529s as a part of it.
Right. Absolutely. All right. Well, we're going to end it there. And like we said, we'll get together one more where we'll talk about very advanced strategies around things like leveraging grade school and high school and paying off student loans and maximizing your savings and working with family and grandparents and all different things like that. That's all for today. We'll talk to you again soon. All right. So that was our third of 4 episodes on 529 planning. So the next episode will be our last episode on 529s, where we're going to take a deeper dive into advanced 529 strategies. And then we're going to move on and start going back to other topics. Now, in the meantime, please visit our website. We've got a lot of other free resources. If you're new to this podcast, there's a lot of other podcasts out there that you can listen to on all sorts of college topics. And also at our website, tamingthehighcostofcollege.com, we've got a number of free resources, including things like a newsletter where we send out all the relevant information on college planning. We also have the scholarship guide for busy parents, the college money report, and other free resources as well. So go ahead and go check that out and see what you can find that will help you in your college planning journey. And of course, if you need some personal assistance, feel free to reach out and give us a call. That's all for this week. We'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Taming the High Cost of College podcast. Now it's time for you to take action. Head to tamingthehighcostofcollege.com for show notes, bonus content, and to leave feedback for Brad. The next step on your college journey starts now.
Disclosures. The information provided to you today is for educational purposes only. It is not intended to be specific recommendations or advice. Please consult with a qualified professional before acting on any of this material. Investing involves risk. Depending on the types of investments, there may be varying degrees of risk. Investors should be prepared to bear loss, including total loss of principal. 529 College Savings Plan Disclosures. Investors should carefully consider investment objectives, risk, charges, and expenses. This information and other important information are contained in the fund prospectuses, summary prospectuses, and the 529 product program description. These documents can be obtained from a financial professional or directly from the plan's website. Please read them carefully before investing. Depending on your state of residence, there may be an in-state plan that offers tax and other benefits, which may include financial aid, scholarship funds, and protection from creditors. Before investing in any state's 529 plan, investors should consult a tax professional. If withdrawals from 529 plans are used for purposes other than qualified education, the withdrawal could be subject to a 10% federal tax penalty, state penalties, federal income tax, and state income tax. Brad Baldridge's disclosures. Brad Baldridge is a registered representative with Cambridge Investment Research. Securities are offered through Cambridge Investment Research, Incorporated, a broker-dealer, and member of FINRA and SIPC. Brad Baldridge is also an investment advisor representative with Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, a registered investment advisor. Baldridge Wealth Management and Baldridge College Solutions are affiliated. Cambridge and the Baldridge Companies are not affiliated. The registered branch location is at 10521 West Layton Avenue, Suite 200, Greenfield, Wisconsin, 53228.